Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Vintage Motocross Radio. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. Today's show is brought to you by Preston Petty Products, The Legend Continues, Vintco, Keep the Ride Going, Amsoil Lubricants, the first in synthetic oil since 1973, and Vintage Motocross Q&A. Watch our live show every Wednesday at 6 p.m. If you're familiar with products DG has produced or manufactured over the years, and the legendary lineup of riders such as Brock Glover, Bob Hanna, Gary Chaplin, Davey Williams, Davey Carson in their early years, you're going to enjoy my guest today. He was an intricate part of the development of many of DG's products, and he was also the race team manager as well as the head of the research there. I could go on and on about his accomplishments. They are just so many. And he has also had an extremely successful career as an engine builder and a race tuner. With that being said, I'd like to welcome my guest this afternoon, Mr. Harry Klemm. Harry, are you there?
I'm here, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure, Harry. How was that introduction? Was that okay? Did I cover some things?
It was terrific.
All right.
Yeah, and I think probably the first thing that I'd like to preface the whole interview with for all your listeners who may or may not have been familiar with Dave Miller of Miller Mano.
Yes.
Obviously, we lost him this week. Great loss. Back in the day, in the early 70s, we were competitors to a certain measure, but I had nothing but total respect for the guy's craftsmanship and hand skills ability. And I always maintained a good friendship with him over the years. In fact, about 6 or 7 years ago, I had him build a pipe for a bike I was taking to Bonneville, and we spent a few hours together just shooting the breeze and had the greatest time. What a class guy and a class act. I
agree with you. It was a loss for us all to lose Dave Miller in this past week. And Harry, call it, I don't know. You're a bit of a mind reader. Of course, the Dave Miller question was in my notes here. I was going to bring it up, but to bring it up at the beginning of the show, that's just fine with me. And our condolences, of course, to the Dave Miller family. Harry, let's talk a little bit about your career. I'd like to know, because I've seen you ride so many different bikes and you've been involved with so many different things. How did you become interested in motorcycles, and what was the first bike you owned?
Well, motorcycling was kind of in our family. My parents were German immigrants, and my father, he turned 18 years old a few months after World War II broke out. Mm-hmm. And so he was enlisted into the German army and went to the Russian front, and ironically, because he knew how to ride a motorcycle, was a motorcycle messenger through the entire World War II. And although it wasn't a very friendly riding atmosphere,
sure.
But after World War II, he remained a very enthusiastic motorcycle rider, and he rode motorcycles well into his 60s after that. So motorcycles were always around our house, and so I never had to argue with my mom about whether or not I was going to get to ride a motorcycle when I turned 15.
As many of us had to go through that, huh? Now, so when did your family come to America, and what was life like? I believe you moved to Detroit as a child.
Correct. My father was a German tool and die maker, and at that time, the Detroit automotive industry, they were paying bounty on European tool and die makers because they were known for the quality of work that they did. And so it was very easy for him to get sponsorship. When he came over, I wasn't born yet. I had an older brother and sister that he and my mom came over with. I was born a year later, and so we lived in Detroit until 1967, he got a job in Southern California in San Diego, again as a tool and die maker, because in 1967, the war in Vietnam was a very hot war, and they were building all the aircraft for Vietnam in San Diego. So we moved to San Diego, and I'll tell you this, in 1967, moving to San Diego was just the coolest thing that ever happened to me.
I bet it was.
So I was very excited about that, and actually, obviously, Southern California was a hotbed of what was going on from a motorcycle standpoint, and so things unfolded very well for me there.
Now, Harry, with all your engine building, there's so much science and physics and so many things involved with it. It makes me, ask the question: Did you go to a trade school or a college?
It's a fair question, and the answer is no.
Interesting.
I was going through high school. I took all the hardest classes, all the college prep and honors classes and all that, and I was slated to go to college and get an engineering degree and all that. But once I graduated from high school, things changed in our family financially, and the whole college thing was not an option. So I thought, well, it's time to just head into life. And for a while, my father wanted me to become a machinist, as he was, and I hated it. and at that time, during my last couple of years of high school, I was road racing motorcycles. I worked for a shop in National City, California, Sunny Angel Motorcycles, and they were all road racing guys. And he gave me a 1959 Ducati Factory 175 to road race, and I road raced that and learned how to work on bikes and everything. My older brother, he raced along with me, and at that time, the Southern California amateur road racing scene was just a hotbed of happenings. And I, like everybody else, I wanted to become a championship racer. The problem was I was really slow. And so that was not going to work out.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, well, the next best thing is I guess I can be a good mechanic. So I became mechanic for my brother, and all of our buddies. Of course, at that time, nobody knew anything about two-strokes, and I was reading everything I could get my hands on, and so I was just working on all of our friends' road race bikes. And at that time, the road racing universe was a pretty broad universe. There were rotary valve bikes, piston port bikes, reed valve two-strokes, and so I got a chance to work with everything and learn a lot about everything in a real short amount of time. And so to me, it was the perfect timing, and I pretty much didn't do anything but work on motorcycles for a long time.
So, Harry, who would you say your mentor was pertaining to, building race engines, and what was your, aha moment that led you down the path?
At that time, there really were none. There was an old guy doing road race engines in Southern California named Mel Dennison. And he had a shop somewhere in Southern California, and as time unfolded, in 1972, his sponsored rider, Don Emdy, won the Daytona 200.
Yes.
And it was the first time that a two-stroke won the Daytona 200, and the first time that a privateer won the Daytona 200. And I spent a lot of time, watching him. But, in the early 70s, all of the quote-unquote old guys in the industry, they were all four-stroke guys. There were no two-stroke guys.
All right.
And I had no interest in four-strokes. And And so it was kind of a lonely existence. But the good news was, as long as, there were so many motorcycles to work on, I could do cut and try testing all day long. And if you do enough of that, it doesn't take long to get smart.
I see. Well, Harry, Billy Joel once said of all the songs he's written and everything, the one song he really dislikes to play or hates when people ask him about it is Piano Man, and yet it's his most favorite song. I am going to jump into 1975 and ask you about Rex Staten, the USGP, and what happened that day. I know you've told the story a few times, and I don't think it's necessarily your Piano Man moment, but I want to know, how did that recipe come together, and how did you actually prepare that CZ? How did it all come about, Harry?
Yeah, well, you know what, and so many people are enamored with that story.
Yes.
And that was my first real professional motocross gig, by that time I already understood the motocross landscape, and I knew that CZs were not the top of the heap.
Right.
But I also knew that Rex was very fast. And, we had a couple of really successful local bikes, a 250 and an open class, so all I had to do was keep them running, and we would pretty much win every place we went. And it was more about collecting paychecks than winning a championship, because he was so much better than anybody else we raced against in the local Southern California thing. And as the Carlsbad GP drew near, our regular weekly bikes, the 250 and the Open, they were getting pretty well worn. And so CZ said, oh, gee, we're going to give you a bike to go to the USGP. And I was fully expecting some razzle-dazzle center port something. Mm-hmm. And we went down there, and they gave us this old, worn-out, clapped-out bike that had been raced by Jim Fishback in the desert.
Okay.
And it had handlebars with the welded-on lever holders and everything. And I absolutely couldn't believe that was what they gave us to race. And, I was a little bit disappointed, but Rex's dad, Slim, he was pissed off. Because, and Slim was a guy you didn't want to piss off. And so he just said, hey, pull out the stops. We're going to do whatever we have to do, whatever we can do to make this thing go as fast as we can. And Slim was actually aware of my road racing background, and aware that was still doing work for lots of guys racing two-strokes in the road racing world. So to his good credit, he had some faith in me, and he said, man, just make this thing go as fast as you can. And I said, well, I can do that, but it might be a little bit hard to ride. And he said, that's all right. Rex knows how to use a clutch. Mm-hmm. And so with that, we went into an intense build-up program. The problem was we had enough time to build the bike. We just didn't have enough time to test the bike, or endurance test it.
Right. About how much time did you have, Harry?
4 weeks.
Okay.
And it took about that to build the bike. The biggest problem I had with the engine, that, I welded up the cylinder head and put a hemispherical dome in the head, ported the cylinder and all that stuff. But all the CZs of that era, and actually still today, they had a lot of serious air leak issues. And at that time, nobody was pressure testing two-strokes because they didn't understand what the whole air leak thing was about. But because I had built 350 Bighorn road race bikes, if those things had an air leak, they'd stick. You'd seize them on a long straightaway. So I took the air leak thing real seriously, and I spent about a week and a half just trying to get rid of all the air leaks in the CZ 400 motor. And so by the time we were all done, Rex and his dad had worked on the chassis. They worked on the forks and the shocks. And it all came together about a week before the race, we had a completed motorcycle, but there just wasn't enough time to take it to a racetrack anywhere and thrash it. And beyond that, Slim, Rex's dad, knew if he turned us loose with the bike, we would go out and thrash it to death.
Yeah.
And there wasn't enough time to fix it if we did that.
So, the day of the race, you get there and you've got this very, very potential CZ that you've put together. And Rex whole shots the first moto. Take us around the track. Tell us what happened after that.
Well, before that, I had been to Carlsbad many times. Mm-hmm. I had never, ever seen Carlsbad with that many human beings there. It was unbelievable. And I knew the bike was fast because we qualified real well. Mm-hmm. And Rex said he felt great, and he said he could easily ride the bike. When we qualified the day before, he said he could ride the bike quite a bit faster than he rode during qualifying. So for us, confidence was pretty high. I had no idea he got the whole shot because the way the whole Carlsbad track was set up then, when they took off from the starting line, the mechanics had to run to an area that was behind a final turn. And all I remember was the roar of the crowd was so loud we couldn't hear, in the mechanics area, we couldn't hear any of the motorcycles.
Wow.
And they were gonna come around a corner about 100 yards away, and the closer they got, the louder the roar of the crowd got. And I thought, oh my God, how in the hell are we gonna know when the bikes are here? And sure as heck, Rex came around that corner in the lead, and on that first lap, he came by, and I watched him go by, and I was not ready because the roar of the crowd was so loud, none of the mechanics could hear any of the motorcycles going by.
Incredible. So now, as the race progresses, Rex is riding real well, but there was some mechanical issues with that.
Yeah, well, I was excited beyond belief, and to be sure, and I was doing everything that I could do to give him proper signals, and Roger was behind him, and he was starting to gap Roger, and I thought, God, this is like a dream come true, and then about midway through the race, when he came by, the bike started making some kind of clattering noise. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh my God, I left a rear axle loose or a swing arm bolt loose or something, and I just felt like such a failure. But he kept riding the heck out of the thing, and by the time the 45-minute race was over, he had salvaged, I think, a 6th or a 7th. And we got back to I ran back to the pit spot and figured I was going to get a serious yelling at because of something I let loose. And he showed up, handed me the bike. I put it on the Mark Charles stand, and we started looking at it. And our brand new sponsor was John Bassett. What a great guy he was. And I'm looking all over the back end of the motorcycle looking for what I left loose. And John spotted that all of the motor mount plates had been broken, and the only thing holding the engine in the frame was the chain and the pipe.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, this is it. And we actually had our local bike, our local 400 there, because I thought I might need to rob a part or two off of it. And I thought, well, the only chance is to swap chassis, which of course there was not enough time for, because there was only an hour in between the races. So I got ready to do that, and John said, no. He says, let's weld it. And I thought he was joking, and he was dead serious, and he found some oxyacetylene tanks somewhere, and before I knew it, he was welding, all of the engine brackets were broken in a jagged kind of fashion. Mm-hmm. So the whole thing dropped right in its original place, and he just started welding the metal back together. And so I thought, okay, I'll just go ahead and prepare everything else, the air filter, and do the rest of the bike prep. And as luck had it, he finished welding just shortly before they called us for the second moto.
Mm-hmm.
And needless to say, it was a little bit of a futile effort, because in the second moto, it took about the halfway point of the race. Those same motor mounts broke right next to John's welds. But it was everything we could do with what we had at the time. And I think the thing that gives the whole story legs, it's a little bit of a Cinderella story, because in a little sense, Rex and I were both 20 years old. Mm. And the two 20-year-old kids show up at an international event with a motorcycle nobody's seen before, nobody's raced against before, and we almost win the race.
Yeah.
And just, I think that component of the story is what makes it so cool, and as well as anybody, in racing, we live in a world of coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Yes, we do.
And that story has coulda, woulda, shoulda all over it.
Well,
but I was really pleased with what we did that day, and there were a whole bunch of Japanese engineers standing around the bike in between races, wondering what in the hell we had built and where this thing came from.
Now, was anybody there from CZ? Weren't they interested in what you were doing?
There was not one single representative from CZ there.
Wow.
And I was a little taken back by that, but I was so busy dealing with all of the nightmares and headaches that I had at hand, I didn't have enough time to really think about that until we were all loaded up and on the drive home. And by then, it was too late to start asking around, where the hell are all the CZ guys?
Now, Harry, that bike came from CZ, so did it have to be returned to CZ? And what was the atmosphere like when you finally had to meet somebody who gave you the bike originally?
Obviously, it was no good. The bike was not rideable, raceable. And we still had our local bikes. And so we just set it to the side because the following weekend we had a local race to go to. Mm-hmm. And ironically, that was the race where we went to. It was a regular saddleback, and Rex won the first two motos, no problem, with the 250 and open. And then after coming off the race, off the track on the open class race, there was this guy who was a brother of one of the Pro 400 competitors that got lapped, and he didn't like the way Rex passed his brother, and this guy was emotionally troubled. And as Rex came off the track on the saddleback exit, the guy was standing there, and Rex was used to people who stood by the exit to give him a high five, mm-hmm. and he was standing in the same area, so Rex figured that's what the guy was doing, and he whipped out a 12-inch crescent wrench and hit Rex in the nose.
Oh.
With a full arm swing, and broke Rex's nose. And it was a surreal experience. And of course, I wasn't standing there. I was already in the pit, waiting for Rex to show up because I had to prepare the motorcycle. And as Rex rolled up, I grabbed the bike, and normally I grabbed it on the one side, and he stepped off on the other side, and he just sat on the bike. He didn't step off. And I looked at him and said, "Hey, come on, get off the bike." And he pulled away his Scott face mask, and all this blood dropped down on the gas tank of the motorcycle. And I looked at his face, and his nose was bleeding profusely, and he fell off the motorcycle onto the ground.
Oh, my.
I was just scared to death. Well, about that same time, there were, probably 30 or 40 people that actually witnessed what happened, and they were running as a mob towards our pit to see how Rex was. And it was a scene beyond a comprehension. And the thing that pissed me off the most was we were going to easily win both classes. It was going to be a good paycheck, but they had to haul Rex off to the hospital, obviously, and so the day was a scrub for us.
Now, Harry, when you brought that bike back to CZ, the one he had ridden the previous week in the USGP, were they must have been enamored how well he did on
Well, I thought they were going to be completely excited, and I had a folder filled with all the notes of everything we had done with it and all that. And we got there, and they said, bring all your bikes, because they wanted everything. And I said, okay. And they took all of our bikes, the USGP bike and our local bikes. And I was sitting there on the back of the truck with my folder, figuring somebody was going to come up and call me into the shop or call me into somewhere to talk about how I built the bike. And there was nobody there. And then all of a sudden Rex showed up about 15 minutes later, and he just said, get in the truck. And I thought, okay, well, we got to drive somewhere else to get the new center port bike.
Sure.
And he just took off for home, and he said, that's it, they don't want you working on any more bikes, because they were convinced that the defective work I did on the bike is what caused the chassis to break. And I just couldn't believe it. And so they told Rex that he could continue to ride for CZ, but I was not allowed to touch any of his motorcycles ever again. So that kind of ended the whole CZ thing. And I had plenty of friends in the Southern California motocross universe, and so I talked with a couple of them about it. And one of my good 125 Pro buddies, a guy named Rick Stout, he knew Gary Harlow of DG, and he said DG was looking for a mechanic. And I said, well, that sounds like a good deal. So he drove me down to Anaheim from Fontana. I met Gary Harlow, and at that time the whole thing about the USGP bike was still pretty big news. So Gary knew about that, and he said, well, I hear you can build pretty fast stuff. He said, do you think you can build a case reed Yamaha 125? And I said, sure. I didn't know if I could or not, but I wasn't going to say no.
Of course not.
So we proceeded into this back room at DG, where there were more Yamaha 125 parts than I had ever seen in my life. They were all brand new. And he just started giving me new crankcases, new cylinders, new cranks, new everything. And he said, here, just take all this stuff and bring me back a case reed. And I thought, well, this is craziness. But I thought, okay. And, as he was doing it, I realized, as I chatted with him later on, he was kind of halfway expecting to never see me again. He figured I was just going to sell all the parts, for beer money and never show up. Well, I showed up a week later on with a full case reed motor. And he looked at it, kind of couldn't believe his eyes, and he said, you want to be a race team manager? And I go, yeah, I don't even know what that is, but yes.
So Harry, the bike that you built with the case reed induction, is that the bike we often see you sitting on in the picture with the yellow frame?
It is, and actually, at the time, the race team had 3 or 4 of those bikes, and the case reed was just one of them. And the sad part was, the case reed ran really good, but the fully developed regular reed valve bikes, the team bikes,
yes,
they were a little bit faster. And so, and I was not sad about that, because building that case reed, that was a pain in the butt. I mean, that was a lot of work.
I'm sure it
so,
was.
And, as the '75 season unfolded, I got time to do more and more development with the regular Yamaha team bikes, because it's important to understand in 1975, Yamaha was not a very popular bike to go motocross racing with, because CR 125s were ruling everything.
Sure.
And Yamaha had swung a deal with DG to give them something close to unlimited amounts of bikes and parts in an effort to try to make Yamaha 125s as fast and as competitive and as cool to own as Honda CR 125s. Because at that time, the Honda CR 125s, at CMC club races, they were just killing everybody. And Warren Reed on a FMF CR 125 was winning a lot. And so popularizing the Yamaha 125s was really important to Yamaha, and we succeeded. I spent a lot of time developing those bikes, and we got them to run every bit as fast as the CR 125s, the best CR 125s of the day, ran.
Yeah. Well, in '76, Harry, perhaps the most competitive field of 125 racers were ever really assembled. You had Hanna, you had Marty Smith defending his plate, Warren Reed, and DG had several really fast guys, two being Mark Tyler and John Dillman. At the opener in Hangtown, both riders got the whole shot on DG Yamahas and finished respectively in that race. Now,
in fact, the two of them whole shot at both motos.
Yes.
And on top of that, Brock Glover, during the same time I was doing the development of the Yamahas, I was also full speed on doing development of DG's Honda CR 125 components, and Brock's bike was the leading edge of all of the testing that I had done with those, and Brock's CR 125 was arguably one of the fastest privateer CR 125s in America, and at that same Hangtown race, he won the I forget what the sportsman race, or I forgot what they call it, or the semi-pro race.
Support class? They had a support class?
Support class race. There was a 125 support race at Hangtown, and Brock won that. So, DG, that whole weekend really put DG on the map, and the icing on the cake was, of course, that Bob Hanna had DG stickers all over his water-cooled Yamaha and his helmet. So we looked like the company that just came out of nowhere.
Right.
And it was a gigantic launching point for us.
Well, something else very interesting, I believe, happened within a couple of days of that, is that you were actually called in by Yamaha to their R&D department, and they wanted to know what exactly you did to these bikes. They put them on a dyno, and everyone was quite surprised. What did they find out exactly about your DG-built bike?
Yeah, and that was my first experience putting a bike on a dyno. And at that time, dynos were not nearly as sophisticated as they are today. They were just big water brakes. But I took it down there, and all of their top engineer guys, they wanted to. They already knew how much horsepower Bob's bike made, and what they wanted to figure out was if the DG race bikes made more horsepower, or if they were just lighter, and the guys who were riding them got lucky at the start line.
What was the answer?
And actually, our bikes were lighter than Bob's bike because they had the Profab chromoly chassis. They were extremely lightweight, but a little bit fragile. But our after the final dyno pass, and they made several passes, they shut off the engine, and all the engineers sat there, started staring at each other, and the one head engineer looked at me and says, "Man, it makes a horsepower more than Bob's bike."
Wow.
And his next sentence was, he says, "Well, can we take it apart and look at it?" Well, I was in no position to say no because they had given us all the bikes and parts and stuff. So all I could do was go, heck yeah, go ahead and look at it, which they did, and it took the better part of the rest of the day to do that. And after that, it was a whole heck of a lot easier for us to get bikes and parts from Yamaha.
Well, Harry, let me ask you this. What do you think was the defining moment that made that bike what it was? What do you recall that you did to it that got that extra horsepower out of it? We know about the weight difference, but what did you do engine-wise that brought that bike up to that level?
Well, and it's important to know that the way things went at that time, testing was going on a non-stop basis. And I had 4 or 5 bikes constantly. And the only time we were testing prototypes was all the time, every day. It
Wow.
never stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And at that same time, Profab, the chassis company, was working on the lightweight chromoly frames. And about the same time that I had made about all of the technical horsepower progress I was going to be able to make with the engine, we got the Profab chassis, and they were so much lighter than the stock ones. And that's what really turned the corner. And we didn't actually get those chassis very long before the Hangtown race. So when we went there, they were kind of a little bit unproven. But that's the way it was done back then. We didn't have time to go out and, take a bike on 6 45-minute motos to see how it was going to last. You built it, you showed up at the races, and you did your endurance testing at the races.
Right. Well, Harry, I mean, being a well-established team manager and doing all the work you did at DG, making fast, reliable bikes, the factories had to come calling at some point. What were some of the offers you received?
Well, they did, actually. I got offers from both Yamaha and Suzuki. The ironic thing was, during the time, in these first couple of years I was working for DG, Gary Harlow, the owner, he realized that, A, I knew what I was doing, and B, he was unlikely ever going to find another guy like me, because I was working 7 days a week, and you just can't pay people to do that.
Right.
So he paid me a ton of money, more than I'd ever made in my life, and more than any mechanic was making. And when Yamaha and Suzuki made their offers, they weren't paying as much money as I was making at DG. And I said, gee, I got to live out of a suitcase, drive all over the damn country in a box van, and make less money. The math just didn't work out for me. So I continued to stay at DG.
Yeah, and Harry, from some people I've spoken to and about their careers who have known you, you're known as a very generous person who didn't forget people along the way. And once you got really well established at DG, you had some buddy mechanics that you took under your wing, went on to have some pretty successful careers. Do you remember any of those people, the ones that I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, yes, and there were quite a few. The first one that comes to mind, and it was the first actual assistant that I had, was a guy named Pat Alexander. Pat was, back in the day, we had a name for him. Every racer had what we called a buddy mechanic. And it was just a buddy who lived down the street or somebody he knew that acted as his mechanic. And so at the DG shop, I would let the buddy mechanics come in and work on the race bikes in the shop. And while they were working, I would kind of coach them a little bit and see who had their act together and who did not. And Pat was just an unbelievably hard worker, a sharp guy, and the job I had at DG was a job that needed to be done like by 4 people. but there was no one else to do it. So, I would take on a helper anytime I could. And Pat was the first helper. God, he worked out great. But after he was there for about a year, he realized that any job on earth was going to be easier than being a race team mechanic at DG, because we were constantly maintaining 7 or 8 motorcycles.
Yeah.
Besides all the DG package racers we were building. And so Suzuki made him an offer to be a mechanic on the motocross team, which I can't blame him for a minute. He took the offer, and it was only a few years later he became race team manager. And actually, Pat still works for Suzuki. He's like the financial czar of the entire racing division at Suzuki. And pretty much runs the whole program over there.
Yeah. Now, Harry, let me ask you this. Feedback from a racer to a mechanic or to a team manager, it's always been critical to get the most out of a race bike and the most out of the rider. Who are some of your favorite racers to work with that you tuned for at DG?
Yeah, and it's such a good subject you bring up, because, at the time, the term test rider did not exist. Mm-hmm. And there was a general belief is, whoever the racer is, you ask him if the bike, what the bike's doing, and you make changes based on that. But there were a whole bunch of really talented racers that were the worst test riders in the world, because what they wanted was, every time you showed up at a test session, they were expecting you to show up with a bike that was as fast and handled as good as a factory bike. Mm-hmm. And so they had 2 categories, good and no good. And that was pretty much, no, this is no good. I go, okay, well, I need to advance it a little bit. Help me out here, help me out there. No, it's just no good. This is no good. And obviously you can't get anywhere with a racer like that, but as time played out, right, I did find a couple of guys that were good test riders. At DG, by far the very best one was a guy named Dave Taylor.
Yes.
And besides being a great test rider, he was a damn fast racer. Just did really good at night racing and day racing. He was very physically fit. And as I often tell people, at DG, there were many guys who advanced onto the factories. Guys like Hannah, Bell, Glover, and Dave was the fastest guy that never got a factory ride. And it wasn't because he was not fast enough. It's because by the time he had matured and was easily fast enough to be one of those guys, all of the factories had a full stable of riders, and they just plain didn't need to hire anybody else. Mm. Yeah, and so the timing was not there. And I'll tell you, another racer that happened to is a guy named Gary Denton. Sure. Like Dave Taylor, he was a great night racer, great day racer, and he just really struggled and tried to get sponsorship, and he was always in there, always fast. But he had gotten into his early 20s, and by that time he was considered too old to be taken seriously as a future contender. And so years later, in 1985, Suzuki, who I still had a good relationship with, they called me up and says, "Hey, we got this new vehicle we need you to come over and look at," because I had a really good relationship with Toshi Koyama, who was the head of the Suzuki Racing Division. And by that time, Pat was also head of the race team. So I went over to Suzuki, and I had to sign all these papers to say I wouldn't talk about what I was going to see. And they took me into the shop, and they showed me the first quad racer, the first four-wheeler, because four-wheelers did not exist. And they said, we want to race these things, and we need a quad racer but there are no quad racers. You know, they were racing three-wheelers at the time, of course, the Honda ATC 250.
Yeah.
But we don't know where to find a quad racer. And I said, well, okay, I'll find one. And so I called Gary Denton, and his motorcycle career was kind of languishing. He showed up at the shop, rode the bike, goes, hell yeah, I can race it. We went to a couple of local Thursday night events, which is when they raced ATVs at Corona at the time, and that was the place where everybody brought their new stuff. And Gary just waxed everybody for 3 weeks in a row, and after 3 weeks, Suzuki called him up, offered him a factory contract to be part of their factory four-wheeler team,
and he delivered.
On to win like 7 or 8 championships after that.
Yeah, I do remember that, reading that about Gary Denton, because I was, of course, doing the research with the DG thing, and that came up during my research. Now, Harry, after the DG years, or maybe while it was still even going on, you became interested in racing at Bonneville and setting some records with some bikes there. How did that come about, and what are some of the records you hold, and in what classes did you hold them in?
Well, I'll tell you that I was always interested in Bonneville, but you know, at that time, that was quite a ways off for me. You know, I got to where I was more interested in doing research and development. Mm-hmm. And at DG, you know, after what I call the premier years of 75, 76, and 77, there were lots of models of bikes coming out, and the guys in the sales department just started taking orders for pipes and heads of all the new bikes for parts that we didn't have. And I said, hey, you know, you can't just take these orders. We don't have the parts yet. Mm-hmm. They say, okay, we'll just make them because I already got 50 orders. And I go, no, it does not work that way. And the whole DG thing turned into much more of a marketing thing than a racing thing. And it became really, really difficult. They turned my job into a job no human being could do. And so, you know, after 5 years of working 7 days a week, I just realized I'd had enough. And so I left, and I started my own company called Klemm Research. Yeah. And the reason I chose that name was the only products we sold was stuff we had actually researched, stuff we had done development programs on. And that company did very, very well. So fast forwarding, though, to the Bonneville thing, actually the Bonneville thing I did only about 10 years ago. I was old, in my late 50s, and had always wanted to go. My brother and I, in our road racing days, we had road raced Kawasaki 350 Bighorns. And now this was in the early 70s, and done real well with them. And so we, around 2010, we thought, gee, you know, vintage racing is a big deal. If we're ever going to do vintage racing, we better do it now before we turn into old geezers. And so I bought 5 Bighorns, and with all those parts, built 2 race bikes. And, you know, because I've been in the two-stroke racing business forever, we took about 4 months to test the bikes, and they were rocket ship fast compared to everything else in the class we were racing. They were like 20 miles an hour faster than the Honda 350s we had to race against, which was good because my brother and I, we were both old and fat. And so we raced an entire season with Arma in all the Western USA races, and we just killed everybody, you know, took first and second in every race we were in. And then after we won the championship, they banned our bikes because they could. Yeah. And so I thought, well, okay. And at Bonneville, they have a whole bunch of classes for vintage machinery. And so we prepared the Bighorns to go to Bonneville the next year, and at the same time I was building a Kawasaki 500 triple. And these bikes were all what they call production bikes, which means it has to have stock pipes, stock carburetors. No expansion chambers, no giant carbs. No, it has to be kind of production based.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, the 350 Bighorn, the production bike, went 97 miles an hour with me on it. And at the time, I weighed like 220 fully dressed. And the 500cc triple went 117. And those were both records for the class. And in fact, in that vintage open class race, the prior record was held by a BSA 750 triple, and it was 98 miles an hour. And I went 117, so it was not a small increase.
No.
But, to get the records for me wasn't that big of a deal, but the whole experience of spending 5 days at Bonneville, it is unlike anything else you will ever experience. And I tell everybody, if you've never been, you gotta go, because it very literally is the ultimate cathedral of speed.
Will you be going again this year? Do you go every year?
No, God, I wish. Yeah, well, what happened is the year I went, 2011,
yes,
it was the last year that they didn't have any flooding because they've been taking away so much salt that the track and the pits are flooding now. And so they're trying to restore the salt. I had customers I built Bonneville motors for, and they went in the years after I went, 12, 13, 14, and they had to cancel the races because the entire salt flats were flooded with about a foot of salt water. So I'm told last year was the first year that the salt was not flooded. And so, I might consider going again.
Harry, what your company now? It's not Klemm Research anymore. It's
no. For the last 35 years, I've been doing personal watercraft, two-stroke jet skis, and that company is Group K. And when we started road racing our Bighorns, I needed a business name I could write off all of our racing expenses to. So I created a second company called Klemm Vintage, and I made a website and put a bunch of technical documents on it. And I put a big document about how we built our 350 Bighorns, and it was in great detail. And I thought, God, first of all, I write way too much, and nobody's going to read this. And the people who do read it, nobody's going to want to send us an engine, like I might get one or two. The first year, I did 30 Bighorn engines.
Wow.
And I didn't have any idea there were 30 running Bighorns
in
on
the world.
Earth.
Yeah. And I've also heard, Harry, that you still port at least one cylinder a day.
It's true. Since 1986, when I started Group K, I decided I was going to do all my own cylinder porting. And I have been porting cylinders every day since 1986. And if you have a Klemm Vintage or Group K ported cylinder, my hands are the only hands that have ported any cylinder in the last 35 years.
That is impressive, Harry. Harry, let me ask you, in closing, for the do-it-yourself enthusiasts, what are some of your tips maybe for some of the guys at home that still do their own work? I know, I hate to, let me put it this way. I asked you this question one time in private, and you said to me, the single biggest mistake anybody makes is not pressure testing an engine. Air leaks are always the biggest problem.
You're correct.
Well then.
And the thing is that, in fact, we even sell an air leak test gauge, and it's not an exotic part. Anybody can make one themselves.
Yes.
But every time I sell one to somebody, I go, listen, this gauge, it's going to save your engine, but of all the tools you own, you're going to hate this gauge more than any other tool you have.
Yeah.
Because it's going to show you where the problems in your engine are. And when we do engines here, rebuild a vintage engine, it's almost a guarantee that the engine is going to have to come apart 3 or 4 times to chase down all the air leaks that we find. And they're everywhere in places you cannot expect. It's not like they're always at a crank seal. I mean, these engines, they air leak out of places that are unimaginable. And that's one of the things that makes building vintage race engines so challenging is because it takes so long to get them to stop air leaks.
Well, Harry, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. It was very, very interesting.
Well, Joe, I really appreciate it. I realize I probably could have rambled on for another hour, but all your listeners are probably getting bored by now anyway.
I don't think so, Harry. I don't think so. Not hearing you. Harry, once again, from Klemm Vintage, Harry Klemm. Thanks again, Harry, for taking the time.
You take care, Joe.
Thanks, brother. Bye. Harry Klemm, I hope you all enjoyed that interview with Harry. It certainly was very, very interesting for me to put the questions together, and I love all the answers that he gave. Of course, the Rex Staten CZ story is epic, and I never get tired of reading about it, and hearing Harry talk about it in person is just a treat. It really is. I want to thank our sponsors once again. I would like you to visit their website, Preston Petty Products, Amsoil, Vinco, and of course on Wednesday night, I hope you'll join me at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for another episode of Vintage Motocross Q&A. For this Sunday afternoon, this is Joe Abadi. Thanks for listening to Vintage Motocross Radio.